Thank you for watching this video. Please help us keep the show alive by liking and sharing this video and by subscribing to the show and making sure the notification button is switched on. For those of you who can help a little bit more, there's a Patreon link down below where you can contribute whatever you can. Every little does help, and all the money will go directly back into the show. You can also keep up with our latest content on Instagram at The No Show Pod, as you can see on the screen. As you know, The No Show is an initiative designed to make academic research accessible to everyone. So do contribute to the conversation, leave some questions, have a discussion, and I'll make sure I get back to everyone. So Romina, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate your time. I know it's like coming up to Christmas and you've just come back from Ethiopia, so it's a busy time for you.
Yes, thank you for having me. As I said, I'm very happy to support this initiative. As co-founder of Decolonial Subversions, I appreciate any initiative that aims to open knowledge and, show to the world that scientific research can have benefit and can be communicated to the public and can be of use. And I'm very happy to facilitate and, do what I can to support your initiative.
I really appreciate that, and let's sort of start by going into decolonial subversions. What was the motivation behind that?
Oh, for decolonial subversions, we have a long history, sort of being activists, I guess, and trying to, raise awareness about the inequalities in knowledge production. So we started, Monica is my co-founder, Monica Hirmer at SOAS University of London. We started when we were PhD students at SOAS, and we were both coming from different disciplines, but with very colonial legacies, international development and anthropology respectively. So we were working to sort of decolonize the epistemological framework within our field. So, the way we approach our research questions and the way we engage with our research participants, especially in low and middle income contexts, where post-colonial and sort of colonial dynamics, are very salient, and especially given our external positionalities. And in parallel, we started editing the SOAS Journal of Postgraduate Research. We were editors-in-chief voted by the student body. And we aimed, that journal sort of became our platform to open knowledge, to explore what decolonization in praxis might mean, among the student body, for PhD students, for other students at SOAS. And then we sort of became very much involved in this activist movement to, decolonize the university, reconsider how we do research and teaching in universities. But again, because this was a journal limited to SOAS students, we wanted to open it up. So decolonial subversions built on the legacy that we built as editors for the SOAS Journal of Postgraduate Research. And we really wanted to create a platform that is international and allows anyone, wherever they are in the world, to publish in whatever format that they are comfortable in any language they are comfortable in, and still achieve the rigor that is expected in order to be able to influence knowledge production within the Western mainstream framework. Otherwise, we would be creating knowledge at the margins that never influences the center. But what we are envisioning through this platform is that through this intersection of different knowledges and different sort of understandings across the world, we actually make the center irrelevant. So the center and periphery essentially become irrelevant, because knowledge is produced anywhere. So we create multiple centers across the world. That is sort of the vision behind decolonial.
It sounds like a very sound strategy. And but before we get into that, let me sort of, just to clarify to my audience, I want to ask you, how is the research colonized at the moment?
Okay, so these are all spontaneous responses, just to give the disclaimer.
Yeah.
But they are, of course, topics I've discussed, for many times before. So, I guess the response to this question is different depending on your positionality and where you're coming from, right? I think it's important to say that I was born in Moldova, Eastern Europe, and then my family and I migrated to Greece at the fall of the Soviet Union. And then I was raised in Greece, obviously, and managed to obtain a scholarship that allowed me to study in the US for my BA. Then I had my master's in the UK, followed by the PhD at SOAS. Now, the reason I was very keen to study in the West to study in a Western institution, is because I always felt that where I was, whether Greece or Moldova, I was deprived of that excellent knowledge that you would find, in Western institutions, and where knowledge is being produced, really, whether UK, United States, or other Western European societies. So I felt that I had to travel and migrate in order to have access to that omniscience that I needed in order to make an impact on the world. So I had this social calling, sort of service call from a young age, perhaps because of the inequalities I saw at a young age, migrating and changing settings. But I wanted to make a difference in the world, and I thought that I didn't have the tools to do that. I thought that I had to migrate, be in the center where knowledge is being produced, where the best information is available, in order to make that difference. And to some extent, this is true, because this is the system we live in. It's a system comprised of material inequalities, whether it is, research asymmetries in funding opportunities, with Western researchers having more, accessibility to funds, because most of the funders are based in the global north in Western societies, or because of epistemological inequalities, right? Who makes theory, who sets the paradigm, who defines, what knowledge should mean, or what objective science should mean. So, we live in a system that is unequal, and unfortunately it is comprised of a center and a periphery at multiple dimensions, actually. As I have a colleague, Martin Demeter in Hungary, who has actually looked at these asymmetries very carefully in his recent book. And he speaks essentially of a sort of three-dimensional social stratification model, right, where you have, asymmetries in terms of research, asymmetries in terms of academic salaries, asymmetries in terms of publishing opportunities, and of course, language and, the language to start with, right? So all this essentially mean that people start with a different level of cultural capital to make it in the academic world, depending on where they are geographically. So, from ab initio, from the very beginning, this is an unequal system. And historically, it was always Western societies that sort of, the powerful societies in each context. It's not that simple, it's context specific. But the powerful were the ones who set the agenda and the essentially the standards for knowledge production. Again, science, the very concept of science is traces back to Enlightenment thinking within Western societies, and it's not necessarily how other societies think about science, or what is valid knowledge. For example, the relationship between belief and science in particular, which I look at as a religious scholar, is one that is very different by context and geography. For someone, belief, religious belief, for example, might provide a source of valid knowledge. The same source that science for someone here in a Western secular society might serve. It doesn't mean that one is superior to the other, but unfortunately, historically, secular science has been presented as superior and advanced. And this is sort of the colonial mentality that is being perpetuated through science, and through knowledge production. These premises, these assumptions that are very deep are not being questioned. They are sort of taken as granted. So we are trying to sort of ask the very profound fundamental questions critically and reflectively. What is knowledge? And who's supposed to make knowledge, and for what purpose? And should knowledge be institutionalized the way it is currently within higher education institutions, or should knowledge be deinstitutionalized? And if so, how do we achieve this?
It's a very interesting question, because I mean, just in my work and what we do, I do a lot of research into sort of the format of how academic research is presented. So for people who aren't aware of how it works, we, the public, fund the universities. We back the universities, we fund the universities. The universities in turn hire people like yourself who churn out, fantastic research. And then the research, this is where the catch comes in. The research then, in many cases, gets submitted to academic journals, which are private companies, in most cases, that are profit-making. And then they compile the research from, for example, SOAS and UCL and King's and all the universities that they can find, and they package it into, a product and they sell it back to the university. And
Yeah.
so it's fundamentally a very, very flawed model. And this is one of the things that we sort of, why people like yourself that speak about this and you know, see this as an issue are people that need like we really want to have on the show and speak to all the time.
Thank you, and you're right, absolutely. Martin and I just published a paper which scrutinizes actually the what open access publishing and open access journals mean for global inequalities. As you know, in recent years, and especially due to the Plan S initiative by Coalition S, open access has almost been presented as a panacea, to these publishing inequalities. But actually, what Martin and I argue, and many others actually, is that open access publishing actually is then sort of co-opted by the big publishers. And again, at the end of the day, it serves their profit-making interests. So what we did, we actually did a quantitative study, and we looked at the relationship between article processing fees or article processing costs, as you know, with open access models, whether hybrid or what we call gold open access publishing. The fees have to be paid by the author. And the assumption is that the fees will be paid by a funder or the institution, correct? Now, our concern with Martin is that the assumption here is that all researchers are sort of in the same sort of Pareto optimal situation whereby they have access to funds and institutional support, but that's not the case. What we show in this paper is that depending on which country you are based in, you have a different capacity to publish open access papers per year. So based on power purchasing parity or GDP per capita, we look at how many papers theoretically a researcher in any country of the world can publish, and based on the economic status of that country, obviously the number of articles changes. So those who are in very poor countries can only cover the fees for one or two papers, perhaps. Yeah, exactly. Or none. And it's not only that, it's the fact that the structures of funding are such that even though researchers anywhere in the world could potentially apply for some funding opportunities, such as the European grants, let's say, the European Commission grants, the process of applying is so rigid and so specific to European terminology that researchers outside of that system and terminology and legal framework cannot necessarily navigate it, okay? So it goes back to what Martin talks about, the cultural capital with which you start. If you are from Moldova, such as myself, and let's say that you don't have the possibility to be trained in the UK or in the US, you don't necessarily know this language and this system and how to navigate it, correct?
Absolutely, and I think that you point to so many important issues there. The fact that there's inherent inequality in someone's ability to publish a research paper, like
Yes.
submit it to a journal. So, like, supposing you had sort of worked in Moldova and never left Moldova as an academic, the chances that you would have got in comparison to the ones that you have now are extremely limited.
And we had a workshop recently. I was very privileged to be one of the organizers where we sort of again explored with Eastern European scholars. And again, the concept Eastern Europe itself is debated currently, but essentially we brought colleagues, Eastern European colleagues based in Western societies and based in Eastern European societies to try and explore what decoloniality might mean within our region and how we relate to these asymmetries. And, these kind of conversations, we were having precisely this kind of conversations. Our colleagues, there are colleagues in Moldova and there are colleagues in Romania and there are colleagues in Bulgaria who have worked decades on certain topics. They're specialized in their own regions and countries and contexts. And then just by default of, being Moldovan and being in a Western society that gives me more possibilities, I am presented, I am privileged, and my perspective is privileged as the perspective of a Moldovan, but I'm not necessarily as specialized as my peers back in my country. So it's not just the different access to information that we have, or to opportunities, or how to position ourselves, or how to frame the research proposal, or how to frame our work and how to promote it. But it's also the fact that by being in this geography, for almost by default, we are given more credibility. vis-a-vis our partners back home, which is not fair,
No,
fair.
of course it's not fair. And this is the problem that we've sort of, I've discussed this with academics in many places. And like, for example, I'll give you a discipline that sort of, to me, like, I feel gutted when I see this sort of situation happen, and it's in archaeology. Now, archaeology, you have these academics who go to the sites, who live in those countries, you know, uncover some of the most fascinating tablets and you know, pieces of pottery and metal and that sort of stuff, and go back, do phenomenal work on it, do phenomenal research on it, and they just don't have the access to make their research accessible and you know, reach academics. And in the same sort of breath, you have academics who do have the access from Europe and the US, and can come in, do the same piece of, and then their work gets seen by the masses. So this is an incredibly unequal, unfair, and very colonial system.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's just, as I say, it's not based on meritocracy. And I think, you know, one cannot be an idealist in our world. There's no meritocracy, but I think we should be idealists in our aspirations, at least, you know, pragmatists in our strategies and understandings of the world, but also idealists in what we want to see of the world. And, you know, I think there is no meritocracy, and I don't think it's possible, but I think we should aim for something that is fairer and based on one's work ethic and one's sacrifice and one's values. And this actually relates to a more fundamental problem that I have discussed quite frequently in previous webinars and podcasts, one for the UNESCO actually very recently. There is a more fundamental question there, and it's really about how do we value the right people? Right? There is that question. How do we value the right people and the right behavior and the right attitude within the university and outside the university? Because currently the kind of reward system that we have in the university doesn't really foster, you know, necessarily, it doesn't really reward, I would say, you know, work ethic and sort of self-sacrificing attitude, in the sense that, you know, committing to one's research and committing to societal benefit, and not just thinking of one's self-interest, or, you know, how one makes it in their career, how one gets promoted and how one gets to the next step. And one of the reasons I have chosen not to be an academic, I'm not an academic, I am a researcher. I have always wanted to be a rigorous researcher, which is why I have obtained and pursued a PhD, but I have always been an activist. I have always been a practitioner. I have always lived on the ground with the communities. You know, I'm a trained ethnographer and I speak multiple languages, because my whole purpose has been to understand, you know, what I don't assume that I know, and that attitude requires being everything, being a researcher, being a practitioner, being an activist, you know, embodying the values that you want to see. And I don't think, and I have not found the academic context conducive to being able to live those standards. You know, I always feel conflicted when I am in the university, because I cannot be who I really want to be, if that makes sense. And sort of what I found the best approach to exist within the university, and this is what I told my interview committee for the recent project that I was awarded by UKRI. It is a 1.2 million project. It is a Future Leaders Fellowship grant award. Is that, you know, I have a vision, and my vision is to help to resolve a problem with research, with rigorous evidence and rigorous research. And to do that, I need the funds to be a rigorous researcher and a practitioner. So my alternative really has been to find the funding that allows me to be and to operate, you know, by the standards and by the values that I consider important in order to produce beneficial research for society, right? But it's very difficult. It takes, you know, it has taken me 10 years to achieve this. And also I have been very blessed and fortunate to be in this context. And also I have sacrificed many things that, you know, I don't want to go into here. So, you know, this option is not available to everyone, and is not available without sacrifices and many other commitments. So the question really here is, how do we make it viable? How do we make it viable for more people, for more people from the margins to be able to exist in the university, and not necessarily in the university, can be at the margins of the university, to conduct research, to produce evidence, to produce brilliance, as you described it, and inform the world and share it with the world and make sure that the world absorbs it and uses it. That's the question. How do we make it viable?
Like, it's a very important question, but then I would add to it, it's not just how do we make it viable, I think it's how do we make it sustainable? Because if the notion that we're like somebody like yourself, who's an academic, you know, researching fascinating topics and having to go through, like, jump over all these hurdles, and it takes you 10 years to, you know, secure a bit of funding that allows you to sort of pursue your research. It doesn't really strike me as a model that is like all encompassing for people, for researchers across the board.
Yeah, it's not. And this is the sad part. Again, it seems to me that, and increasingly the university becomes more and more funding oriented, because having funding allows you to be promoted, and not just that, by as what you say, secure buyout, so that you can do research and not have to focus all your time on teaching or administrative tasks. So academics are becoming increasingly more funding oriented. And that is not necessarily bad, but the thing is that the reward system that exists in the university makes it almost instrumentalist, and almost, you know, as I said, is not necessary. You don't necessarily apply for funding just because, you know, it's something that you believe in and it's your passion, but you feel compelled to do it in order to be able to build a career in the university, right? And in order to be able to implement, you know, what you believe in. And again, I don't think that this is wrong. I think researchers should be entrepreneurs at the same time, if I may say. I think they should be enterprising at all times. They should be involved in everything. But the sad part is that not everyone has the capacity to do that, because, as I said, they are located, they're based differently in the world geography. And they don't have the same access to funding or the same knowledge of how to approach it or how to apply to it. Just if we take as an example the UKRI funding that I applied to, I very much related to this funding because I have been working for the past, as I said, 10 years to try and decolonize the way international development theory and practice works, in the sense of making sure that local issues are understood from the ground up and are addressed. Research serves practical purposes, right? To address a problem, to make sure that is research for a benefit, but it's also reflexive, to ensure that that benefit obviously reflects not the researcher's understanding of, impact and benefit, but ensure that that reflects the priorities of the communities locally as well. And when I saw that funding, it spoke to me. This is an impact-oriented fund, so it made sense to me very much. And having that experience, I was able to sort of decipher the call and understand what was required of it, right? What the funders were interested in funding. I was able to tell. Now, how many people have that experience to be able to tell? Right. Mm-hmm. I also worked as a research funding officer for a year at SOAS University of London, because I had to make a living after obtaining my PhD. So I worked as a professional services staff, which allowed me actually to understand better how epistemological inequalities link to material inequalities.
That's really interesting. That's very, very interesting. The fact that you get to see it firsthand of how it actually works.
Exactly. I worked in the office. I supported other academics as a PhD graduate to strategize on what funding to apply for, what funding is most appropriate to them in their career level, and so forth. And of course, that was a great experience for me to learn, right, and how to navigate the system. But also, it just brought home to me how really difficult it must be for someone who has no such exposure, right, to make a competitive application. And this is the inequality of it. Those institutions that have the resources, the specialists, whether it is governance, due diligence, pre-award, post-award, this is all funding speak. Those institutions who have these resources and specialists can support their academics to produce, competitive applications to the standard. Those who don't have these resources, whether in Europe, outside of Europe, or what we call the Global South, are very much at a disadvantage if they're going to compete by the same terms and rules with the Western academics who have access to these resources, right? So this is the irony of, the sadness, I guess, of it, that even calls that aim to be open to everyone,
Mm-hmm.
and you might think that they are more egalitarian, they cannot, it's not enough to make opportunities available to people. You also need to support them with accessing and understanding how to make use of these opportunities, right? So it's not enough just to put a call out there and invite applications. You also need to ensure that every researcher, wherever they are given enough support to understand the terms of the call, whether they're eligible, what they need to do to produce a competitive application. And that doesn't happen in a day. This is the thing.
That's the main issue. It doesn't happen in a day, and it's like essentially years of training, and I mean, you've seen it firsthand. It's incredibly domain dependent. You have to actually be involved in it and know what's compelling and what's not. I mean, for our show, we're self-funded, and the first time we sort of tried to dip our toes into the funding world, we just realized that there's so much of it that we don't know, and we need to sort of take time to understand it before we go into to any sort of request of funding pots. But I'm really, really interested in the work that you guys are doing at Decolonial Subversions. And it seems that, I mean, just to tell me, in terms of sort of support and buy-in from universities, how much support, how much have sort of universities been interested in the movement?
Yeah, I mean, Monica and I had this debate since the very beginning, because we could have hosted the project at SOAS University of London, since we were both at the time at SOAS University of London. But this was a critical initiative from the margins that did not reflect just our vision, but our vision of partners. Primarily, we started in India and Ethiopia. These were the fields that we were working in, Monica and I. Monica had spent, I think, almost a decade in India, and I had spent years in Ethiopia. So these were sort of the countries that we had strong relationships with, partners and friends and colleagues, and really was bringing together friends to create this, everyone working voluntarily. Nobody was paid, and nobody's being paid today, and just working around a common vision. We wanted to make a difference to the world. We just said, things cannot continue business as usual. We need a different model. And the thing is, with the current publishing model, I mean, the majority of the publishers are now large publishers, and they dominate it. So it's almost like an oligopoly. And so they set the prices sort of collectively. The market follows oligopolistic patterns, I think, in my understanding. And it's really hard to make a difference, especially if you're a small publisher. But for us, it wasn't about making a difference. For us, it was about finding a way of existing in the system. Decolonial Subversions is an existential initiative. We needed to be able to exist in the system and to do something that makes us feel that we are trying to change the system, and we are really helping substantively to make a difference, and to help people who want to publish but don't have the same opportunities to publish in English and high impact journals to publish with us. So Monica and I actually, especially in the early stages, we spend a lot of time editing. There is this interesting pattern where, despite the fact that we offer publication in multiple languages, any language, and most people want to publish in English, even if they're from South Africa, the Congo, Ethiopia, they want to publish in English because it's considered an international language, and so the publication has more prestige, right? It's considered an international publication, but also because of colonial legacies whereby local languages might not be valued as much. Unfortunately, this continues in our own context and countries, right? So we had to spend a lot of hours working for free, to try and support with editing and proofreading and advice for our contributors, at least in the early stages. Now we have a dedicated proofreader who is a professional. She's also working voluntarily, Rachel Duncan, and she's really taking a decolonial approach to proofreading, because again, this is not just about telling people what the appropriate word is in English, but trying to not interfere with the voice and the tone and the intention of the author, while helping them express themselves, more accurately in English. She has done a fabulous job with that, because she's really conscious of the intention and the voice of the author. We don't want to censor. We don't want to stop the voice. Yes, and this is the biggest task for us, because again, you want to support, and I've had failed attempts. I've tried to edit things and explain to people why they should say this way or that way, because on us on the other side, given our Western mentality, we will understand it differently. So I was trying to sort of explain that, but again, it's very difficult to find the right balance so that you don't interfere with the freedom of expression of the other individual while still helping them to be more accurate in English and really express what they want to express. So we take a pastoral approach with everyone. We go case by case. Now, in terms of funding, we have reached our strategy was to get some small funding from the Decolonising SOAS working group. Because I was a member, we were able to access that opportunity. The Decolonising SOAS working group has a small fund. I think it's called Public Engagement Fund, and it funds small initiatives around London that aim to make a difference in this realm. And so we had a very small funding. I think it was about £800, £700, and then we also reached to foundations that support linguistic justice, or would relate to our vision. So we were very lucky to get another small funding from the Esperantic Foundation, the Foundation of Esperantic Studies. We hope to continue taking the same approach, but also to fundraise, through the public and our supporters, really, because I think one has to be very creative. A single source is not enough, as you say, is not viable, is not sustainable. One has to think creatively and in an enterprising way. And again, when you have these kind of initiatives, you cannot expect a funder to cover all the costs. You can only cover some costs that some funders cover, not everything, not salaries, for example, for the working staff member, maybe project related costs. So, there's different challenges here of funding such an initiative. And
So Romina, where can people find you online and reach out to you?
Oh, they can find me at my email, ri5@soas.ac.uk. If they want to speak to me, I'm very glad to speak. I'm also on LinkedIn. And again, Decolonial Subversions, we have an online platform if they'd like to check that out. And on Twitter, I actually administer most of the time. I'm the one administering our Decolonial Subversions Twitter handle. Okay. So you can actually find me there at decolonise, British spelling with an S.
I'll link them all on the episode so people can get direct access to them.
That would be excellent. Yes, we're very happy to make connections and hear advice and hear thoughts. And again, Monica and I never claim to have the answers. We just started with the premise that we don't know and we have to make a difference. That's what we know. We have a responsibility in making a difference.
Absolutely. I think what you guys are doing is essentially just starting that sort of snowball and pushing that snowball until, you start to get the momentum. But you've done a fabulous job, if you don't mind me saying. And I think it's fantastic to see that. And it's disappointing for me that you have to think in existential terms as opposed to, becoming really present online and that sort of thing. But I'm really, really pleased that you joined me, Romina. I'm so happy to have you, and I really want to have you again. So maybe we can catch up again in a few months' time.
That would be excellent. I thought we would be discussing my latest book and work in Ethiopia. I returned in the UK on domestic violence and religious systems. But I'm very happy to return and talk about my academic work.
I want a dedicated time just for that, because I really want to go into the details of it.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, thank you for having me, Hussein. Good luck with your initiative. We're here and happy to explore collaborations, as I said. Take good care.
Thank you for watching this video. Please help us keep the show alive by liking and sharing this video, and by subscribing to the show and making sure the notification button is switched on. For those of you who can help a little bit more, there's a Patreon link down below where you can contribute whatever you can. Every little does help, and all the money will go directly back into the show. You can also keep up with our latest content on Instagram at The No Show Pod, as you can see on the screen. As you know, The No Show is an initiative designed to make academic research accessible to everyone. So do contribute to the conversation, leave some questions, have a discussion, and I'll make sure I get back to everyone.